That's just what we like. I am super excited to be talking to John Tjenos again today, this time to talk about his anxiety protocol. And what we're seeing currently more and more, and I'm seeing in clinic and even at the event that I hosted last night, was parents and children that their levels of anxiety and stress in their bodies are increasing and increasing and increasing, and they feel like they don't have tools, practical tools that they can use daily or in the moment to reduce that stress load on their bodies. At the moment, uncertainty and not knowing what's happening around the world. In New Zealand, there's a whole bunch of new things happening. That can be one of the causes of stress, and which can then turn into anxiety. So I'm super excited to be interviewing John now so that he can talk about all his different oils and how you can use them and what they're doing in your body, and how this can actively help you in your daily life and in your family's life and children's life. So John, thank you for your time today, and I'm super excited. He's even done this amazing PowerPoint presentation that you'll all have access to and be able to watch in this recording.
Great. You know, I'm clear that in my practice, maybe those who show up in my practice, maybe 1 out of 4 people is having some kind of anxiety disorder. And indeed, in the United States, that's the statistic. 1 out of 4 people is diagnosed with anxiety disorder. And we all have some experience of it. You know, and the question I always like to ask my clients is, how is anxiety diminishing your life? How is it diminishing your performance? A lot of times people know it's an uncomfortable feeling, but they don't have a sense of how it might be diminishing their performance, whether they work in a corporate environment, self-employed, whether they're mothers, fathers, whether they're partners, whatever the situation, there's a sense of anxiety constricting us. And indeed, it actually does create a constrictive perspective. And also, even our blood vessels constrict. So if you think about how it's diminishing our performance, I'll call it performance, whatever that may be like for you, it's diminishing your productivity, your creativity, your ability to succeed. And even if you think about what is it like to interact with somebody who's anxious, that in itself creates anxiety. So now you're with somebody, and all of a sudden now the communication, the ability to relate is diminished. If you're in a job situation, whether it's a job interview, product pitch, making products relevant to a customer, all those things are diminished, as well as on a personal level, family relationships, and maybe most of all, our relationship to ourselves.
When you talk about anxiety, though, just for people that don't know what that means or how that would be coming through in their bodies or what they'd be experiencing, what do you mean by anxiety? Like, we obviously know the extreme forms of anxiety when we have been diagnosed with it or potentially on medication. And when you talk about 1 in 4 people coming into your clinic with anxiety, is that because they've been diagnosed with it, or what symptoms? Like, how is it impacting people in their daily lives?
That's a great question. Because a lot of times people are reluctant to call it anxiety. One of the qualities of anxiety that we all know is repetitive thinking, where we get locked on something that we feel anxious about or concerned about. We keep looking at it, we keep thinking the same thought. Anxiety affects us on a physiological level also. It changes our heart rate, it changes our breathing, changes the temperature of our body, changes our blood pressure. Sometimes it'll even create a symptom like a dry mouth. So all those symptoms that we're feeling are under the title of anxiety. But anxiety, I would like to suggest, is under the subset. It's the subset of fear. Anxiety is a low-level state of fear. And indeed, anxiety is actually a low-level survival state. When we have a chronic fear, our system goes into a survival state. So it is alerted. Something is threatening us. Something is out of order. Something is not right. Yes.
And why does it matter that our body is in a survival state? Like, how is that impacting us? How is that diminishing our well-being and our lives? Like, what is that doing in our bodies for it to be a concern or us not to want to be in this state?
One of the things I was suggesting is that it locks us in on whatever we're fearful of. I like to tell clients, imagine you're walking through a forest and you hear a tree branch crack, which means something is in the forest with you, maybe. And you hear it and you look and you don't see anything. It's not like the brain is going to stop thinking about that sound you just heard. It's going to lock in on it. And we're designed, when something is a fearful state, is to go into a narrow focus and try to find it. And then we're also designed to repeat it. We're not supposed to not forget that there's a threat in our environment. Now, with anxious thoughts, you can go anywhere with your brain, right, and have an anxious thought. It could be the way the boss looked at you. It could be not getting enough stuff done, not being productive enough, your social standing, something about your relationship, your financial condition. We have so many things we could possibly be uneasy around, and we can lock in on that. So one of the things that I think anxiety really does is it diminishes our ability to be in life because we narrow our vision. And we also go into a place, strangely enough, like when you're in a state of fear, crazily enough, you feel sort of this buzz, but you actually don't feel much beyond that. One of the things about anxiety is you stop feeling less. Like when we're anxious, our senses go to just what has made us anxious. And it's hard to feel anything around you.
So would that mean you'd find it hard to have compassion for others? It would be hard to see other people's point of view. Like you're kind of like a tracker, like a racehorse, right, with the blinkers on. Like all as you can see is that one thought, that one whatever's happening. So there's no room for so from a business point of view, you wouldn't have a lot of creative ideas, necessarily be able to think outside the box or think outside the train of thought, right? Because you're locked on that because you're in that state of anxiety. Right.
It really narrows our perspective. We lose perspective, we lose creativity, we lose ability to relate. Let's think about decision making. Since you brought up the corporate situation, decision making is something that's a large part of everyone's job, whether it's being at home or in the work world. And if you think about decision making, is part of what defines our life. It's what makes up our life, are the decisions we make. When you're anxious, your decisions are from a fear base, and so when we're in a fear state of our body and brain, we're either going to be paralyzed, where we can't move, we can't make a decision, right? Or we're going to be in a fight or flight state. So we're going to be adversarial, or we're going to try to avoid. That's the flight part of it. So frozen, fight, flight, and that's more the possibility, rather than seeing like the perspective that you want when you have a problem is life is full of obstacles, and the obstacles are opportunities for us to learn and be able to find new ways for things. And so an obstacle comes into our field, instead of just locking on it with fear, we say, okay, what are possibly some of the solutions? What's the next steps I can take? What is this relationship with this obstacle? How did this obstacle arise? Is there something I did? So it gives us all these other things. But when you're in an anxious state, it's very hard to think out of it. You just keep repeating what is fearful to you. So indeed, anxiety is going to kill creativity. It's going to reduce perspective on solutions. One of the things, a lot of times we use anxiety to increase our endurance, right? Because you will adrenalize yourself with this. And so sometimes we think, okay, it's going to force me to keep going. And indeed, anxiety can do that because you're in a fear state, right? You're not thinking about how your body feels anymore. But at what cost? Because it's going to induce fatigue. Remember, anxiety shuts down digestion. It shuts down detoxification. It shuts down the immune system. Big underline, right now. It shuts down the immune system. It shuts down the possibility of being able to relate to life in a way where you see all the variables and possibilities.
Absolutely.
So, one of the things I thought in terms of like part of anxiety, part of the issue that I see with my clientele is how you think about your anxiety. And I think that we learn a lot by looking at it through the neuroscience lens. And so I want to do this very simply. I want to give you some images. But one of the things I really want you to underline is that, and this is an important part of Neo Myalo, New Mind's approach to anxiety, is that when you're anxious, we employ, because it's a survival state, we employ many, many systems in the body all at once. Now, the solution often for anxiety in our world, if a person has that disorder, is something to sedate a certain part of the brain, which we'll get into later. But it's usually just one facet of this whole cascade of physiological and neurological actions the brain takes. So I wanted to try to, if a client or today a viewer can get to this idea, see the brain from this perspective, you realize that changing this pattern of anxiety demands a multi-factored approach.
Totally. There is just no one thing to be able to help with anxiety, right?
Yep, exactly. So what's the best way to think about the brain? I mean, the brain is, it's insanely complicated. It's everything connects to everything in the brain, and there's trillions of subregions. But all this in complexity, and this is what I'm going to attempt to do, can be broadly simplified when seeing the brain in terms of it being 3 layers. Now, let's go to the 3 brain model here. So you'll be able to have this PowerPoint to remember some of the things I'm going to be offering today. So this 3 brain model is reptilian, limbic, and neocortex. We're going to go briefly over all 3 of these pieces. This model was created by Paul MacLean, 1960s. He was like the grand poobah of neuroscience at that point, and he came up with this model, and it's still a very useful model to provide a foundation for coherently talking about the brain, and especially, I think, with behavioral things like anxiety. Okay, so for the reptilian brain, you can see it's the bottommost part of the brain. It's the brain stem back here and the cerebellums. You don't need to remember that, but it's the reptilian. We basically, have the same wiring as a lizard, just like any ancient creature. So where is it? As I said, it's at the bottom of the skull. And what does it do? Well, it does all the regulatory functions, temperature, blood pressure, heart rate, monitoring blood sugar, and just keeping things in balance. It also affects our facial muscles, the olfactory system, our visual system, our hearing system. But really importantly, I want to underline this, because I know that all of the people who are tied into Shelley know about the vagal nerve, but it also is the place where the autonomic nervous system turns on the parasympathetic nervous system. So this is where the autonomic nervous system, autonomic means automatic. And so yes, Shelley just picked up the vagal oil. We'll get that in a second. So this part of the brain is controlling all these functions, and also, so it controls the vagal nerve, which tells the heart to slow down, tells the breathing pattern to slow down. It says to have more of a peripheral vision. The vagal system is also about relating to one another, social connectivity. So it's really an amazing, powerful reptilian part of us. It's the oldest brain. It's the first one that was created. And so the second thing to underline.
In other words, John, if that's the oldest part of the brain, that would say that we're wired and we're created for connection. We're actually created to be in community. We're created to be connected to one another, right? Like that is where, so when we're in connection, are you saying another way of looking at that is that's when we get into a vagal state, into a parasympathetic state as well. So we're not actually designed to be silos on our own, living by just on our own. Basically, you need to be in community, you need to be in connection. That is the oldest state of our brain.
Exactly. You know, one interesting thing about the vagal system is there's two branches. One is the oldest one, the real lizard one, and the second one was added a little bit later, a couple 100 million years later, and it was connected to interacting, social connectivity. Yes, but the parasympathetic nervous system is very much about being communicating and be communicative on this basic level, right?
When you go into a fear state, that means you're narrow visioned, you've got the blinkers on again. So that's the beginning of anxiety. So the more you stay like this and can't regulate your nervous system, the more it kind of perpetuates the fear and the anxiety and the stress in your body.
Yes. Well, we're on the vision part of it. It's very interesting. So when we're anxious, we could lock in on one thing, especially if it's a real present danger. But more often, it's like we're looking at this, then we're looking at that, we're looking at this, we're looking at this, right? And so often the brain will jump from thing to thing to thing. So that might be a little confusing later, but the brain, we're going to try to do this to the brain. Okay, so the other part of the autonomic nervous system is the sympathetic nervous system. And this is the part, it's on the opposite side of the parasympathetic. They balance each other. I think one's on, the other's off. When the sympathetic nervous system's on, heart rate increases, blood pressure increases, all the blood moves to our core so we could run and fight. We can move, we can mobilize. I'm in a sympathetic state now too, so it's not a bad state to be in. I'm not in a fight. I'm not feeling like fighting with Shelley or running away from her, but I do need to really bring up my attention and my focus right now in this narrow way. So the sympathetic nervous system works in this case, right? As long as I can keep it here. So the sympathetic nervous system is in this reptilian part of us. Okay? So now, the next part of the brain, the limbic brain, it's sitting on top of the reptilian brain, you see? It was originally called the paleo-mammalian brain. It's the mammal. It's the part of the brain that defines being a mammal, partly. But it's also the emotional part of the brain. As we know, lizards are not known for their emotionality, right? So it happens, this emotional brain happens in our limbic brain. Fear, rage, arousal, anxiety, sexual longings, love. So in this emotional brain, we're going to talk about it more fully, but there's a part of the brain called the amygdala. Let me just put my cursor right here, the amygdala. The amygdala, before I get into more deeply, the amygdala is really the fear center of our brain. When they've done work where they'll take a probe into a person's brain and stimulate the amygdala, for those people who like to have probes put in their head, I don't know who these people are, but they already have a hole in their head. They're able to access the brain. They stimulate it. The person goes into a state of fear automatically. And if that state is continuously aroused, it turns into virtually homicidal rage. Conversely, when the amygdala is surgically removed, when it's been removed, a person can't experience fear, which we need in life. We need some fear, or any kind of anger.
How is it getting surgically removed, or why is it getting surgically removed?
It's probably due to cancer.
Okay.
Or some kind of hemorrhage or something. But in the cases where people have had the amygdala destroyed or removed, any kind of amygdala destruction creates this absence of fear or rage. So they know pretty much. They also know from MRIs, they'll be doing an MRI and they'll arouse a person's fear, and the amygdala will light up. So we pretty much know this is the center of it. Secondly, in the limbic system, really important, is the hypothalamus and the pituitary.
So where are they located in your brain, John?
Oh, well, you can see right here in the limbic brain, and it's forward. It's towards the front, right up here, hypothalamus and pituitary. So if you were to go right above the brow and point straight back, maybe 1/3 the way back in the brain, you'd find the hypothalamus and the pituitary, little pea-sized parts of our brain, but they would control the, importantly in discussion of anxiety, they control the adrenals. They control the thyroid, and they control the testes and ovaries. So that's going to be a really important thing, because the amygdala, when the amygdala lights up, it almost always talks to the hypothalamus and says, hypothalamus, kick into gear, tell the pituitary to tell the adrenals to produce lots of cortisol and epinephrine, which are adrenal hormones in response to fear.
Which then creates stress in your body, which creates more fear, which leads towards anxiety, right? Like that's just where it can lead. But it
right, so now, now you get the amygdala talking to the pituitary and the adrenals and saying, pour out a bunch of adrenaline into the system.
And on a daily, though, when you stay in that state, when you made the connection with the adrenals, that is going to burn down or run down your little energy powerhouses in your body, because they're constantly on, they're constantly spinning, which was my story. And so eventually those poor glands are going to get worn out, which also regulates your thyroid health and your hormonal health. And how many people want to get pregnant, or they don't want any symptoms during menopause? It comes back to the brain, and it comes back to your nervous system.
You know, Shelley, the more I've studied anxiety, and the more I've witnessed it in people, nothing wears the body down more than chronic anxiety. Maybe depression is right up there with it, but anxiety and depression are incredibly degrading to every system of the body, whether it's our cardiovascular system, whether it's digestion, and whether it's fertility even. Fertility, whether it's hormonal balance. If you are constantly employing, the amygdala is telling the adrenals through the hypothalamus to turn on all the time, it's going to exhaust every part of the system. So if anybody has any desire for longevity, chronic anxiety is your enemy.
Well, it's going to lead to burnout eventually, because you can only run on adrenaline and run on cortisol for so long before those organs and the brain gets tired and worn out.
Right, right. So the amygdala perceives a threat, and it could be just an anxious thought, and it communicates to the hypothalamus to trigger the adrenals to provide. What the adrenals are doing is they're providing us energy. They break down muscle, and they take those proteins and turn it into energy, and that's what the adrenals do. And they're doing that because they assume that you need energy to meet the threat. Human beings used to be threatened by physical things, and then now human beings have evolved or devolved to constantly creating these situations that feel like they're threatening. And then the loop that Shelley and I have been talking about is, once you start getting into that perspective, now everything looks fearful. Somebody smiles at you, instead of saying, that's so nice, you're saying, I wonder why they're smiling at me. Right? And that's very present, at least in our country. People are all a little bit anxious about each other right now. So I just want to underline the adrenal piece is that for every fear response, it's going to light up the amygdala, and then it's going to talk to the adrenals. So every fear response is an adrenal response. Okay? Mm-hmm. One thing I want to get to before we leave the limbic brain, this is really important to understand what we're doing with our essential oil formulas, is that the limbic brain is very tied into our senses. All the senses are coming in. Our sensory cortex feeds the limbic brain immediately. So, for example, we can have certain smells that trigger fear, and we have certain smells that trigger well-being. So let's say I was looking at a gas burner on a wolf range. It's a special range for cooking. And you know, if the pilot light doesn't start the flame, you'll have gas pouring into the room. So they've added to this gas a noxious smell. It's not natural, it's not innate to the gas, but they've added a smell to alert you. So when we smell this, we go into a survival state. So we associate that smell, the amygdala says, danger. Now, when we use one of our oils, one of the oils I'm going to bring up in a second, the oil called Anxiety Resolve. When you apply it to your pituitary, you apply it back here to the brain stem. So we're trying to communicate this way into the brain, and then we communicate, put it over the heart. Okay, so now when that happens, we're going to then also take a breath. We're going to take a breath like this. And then we're going to take a slow exhalation. Now I took those 2 breaths with my nose. I took in the scent of the oil. And now the exhalation is providing a relaxed response. It's calming down the amygdala, calming down the adrenals. It's calming down the brainstem, the sympathetic nervous system. And so now you're going to start associating this smell with this breath. So now the amygdala is going to get that information through the olfactory sense into the amygdala. And now the amygdala is going to say, oh, that scent means a long, slow exhalation. It means coming into the present. It means not jumping forward. You know, the old trope about anxiety is always thinking about the future or the past. So one way to get out of those things is with the breath and being present in the present moment. So that's the limbic brain. Okay, so limbic brain is also, by the way, this is really where we're dreaming. Limbic brain really, when we're in a state of REM sleep, the limbic brain really lights up. Okay, so, you know, the neocortex is that top layer. It's the most recent developed part of the brain. If most creatures have some neocortex, the primates have a lot, and then human beings have a lot of neocortex, right? So it's sitting right on top of the limbic brain and the reptilian brain. It's regarded the most recent part of the brain that's evolved, and it also is for things like language and abstraction and planning and perception, and really importantly, it's also designed for focus, where we just determine we want to focus. It's really designed in terms of taking and interpreting our sensations that the limbic brain has experienced. It's how we interpret them. So the neocortex is helping you interpret whether it's a noxious gas or an essential oil formula that's meant to be calming. So neocortex is really about perception, and it's about focus, and it's about expression. So those are the 3 brains. And so when it comes to anxiety, they're all interacting. And so let's think about how it happens. So if the heart beats faster, it's a reptilian experience, right? But it's coming from the limbic brain. Something has created a threat to our system. We sense a threat, and the limbic brain lights up, and now it communicates to the hypothalamus to produce adrenaline, but also communicates down into the reptilian brain to say, we need the sympathetic nervous system turned on right now. So that's part of that function, is to increase the heart rate to get blood to be facilitating all the muscles of our body to fight or flight. So we see we have a threat, the limbic brain takes it in and communicates down to the reptilian brain. So it increases all those different physiological functions, which is how we know we are in a sympathetic state. Those are the telltale nervous system states. So layer 2 has fired up layer 1, the amygdala to the sympathetic nervous system, called fight or flight. Then it's very easy to imagine the top layer, the neocortex. You've read about a relationship with someone at work or remember a traumatic event. These are just thoughts, but it's the cortex taking those abstract imaginary states into an emotional response. And the emotional response then goes into layer number 2, the limbic brain, the amygdala. The amygdala is always asking one question, really: am I safe? And in this situation, the body says no. The neocortex says no, I'm not safe, I'm not safe, I'm not safe. So the amygdala then stimulates down to the reptilian sympathetic nervous system and says turn on all those functions. So to think about how the cortex can immediately affect the reptilian brain, you know, I remember this in college. A professor of mine said, if you want to get your heart to race, imagine your heart stopping with mortality. Just thinking about the heart stopping. It's beating, you suddenly say, how does it do this? What if it stops? It'll cause your heart rate to actually increase by thinking about it stopping. So that simple thought, that curious thought, my heart's going to stop someday, will actually, for a moment, increase the heart rate. So that's very easy to imagine, that 3 talks to 2, 2 talks to 1. Now, if let's think about the reptilian state, like how does that communicate up? So if we suddenly are in a situation where, let's say we're cooking and we cut ourselves, that immediately communicates into the amygdala. I'm in danger. And then it goes up to the neocortex, which says, am I going to bleed to death? Do I need stitches? Do I have to go to the ER? So when those physical immediate things happen that threat our survival on the most basic level, the reptilian brain can communicate bottom to top.
So, John, now that we understand the science of what's happening, because we've got a lot of mums that need to drop off their kids, what do we do about it? So we understand it, but like most people want help at the moment, especially because it's stressful. And knowing all of this is useful, obviously, because we like education and empowerment, but how do we get this, or how do we stop this pattern? If we're already in it, if it's already happening, we're already feeling stressed, anxious, overwhelmed, not connecting because of society, what do we actually do about it now? How can we stop this practically?
Okay, so let's start with the first product. So here's the amygdala. You see information comes in, and then the output is, remember, here's the sensory exterior world thoughts, and now it says turn on adrenals, turn on sympathetic nervous system, turn on prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the neocortex, but it's saying, I better lock in on that fear, okay? So, anxiety resolve. Anxiety resolve is designed to support this process. This neurotransmitter called GABA, we've probably all heard about it. GABA has all these receptor sites for it on the amygdala. So there's the way that we're designed to calm the amygdala. So it's with GABA. And so there's no GABA in this essential oil formula, but increases the receptivity of the GABA with the breath pattern we take. Breathing simply, long, slow exhalations increase GABA. So this anxiety resolve, which we put on, we place it on over the pituitary, we place it on
the brainstem,
back here, as we did before, and then the heart. We take our breath, and it's designed to calm the amygdala. You know, these events when things are feeling insurmountable, these moments, we need to shift our ability to be in a different frame of mind. So the part of the brain that does this is the prefrontal cortex. It sends the signal to send GABA down to layer 2 to calm the amygdala. Interesting, isn't it? So now sometimes our brain is doing this. It's jumping from thing to thing, right? And so we have this product which we introduced a couple weeks ago called NeuroSpeed. It supports the prefrontal cortex from jumping around. So if your anxiety feels like you're distracted by everything, you can't stop thinking about it. If your anxiety is saying, I can't stop thinking about something, this one thing, then this is not the product to use. But if your brain is jumping from thing to thing and it's anxious and you need to focus on your work, you're going to use the neurospeed, and you're going to place it over your prefrontal cortex. And then you're going to use your converged vision. This is really important. Our vision can really control this. We're going to now stop us from jumping from thing to thing by staring at this one point on the bottle.
Remember, we did this exercise with everyone in the other interview that we've posted as well. So we've talked.
So we're going to be staring at that circle and not blinking. So that's when you'd use neurospeed. But we want to go back to the oil that's really basic to the experience of being in a anxious state. The amygdala fires up and immediately communicates down towards the brainstem, the reptilian brain. And so we're going to be using the Vagal 2.0. And we put it the same place back here as we put the anxiety resolve. We take a breath in, take another breath in, purse our lips. One more time. I promise you, you will feel a shift. These are your first two go-to oils when you realize you're anxious. It's best to do it when you recognize, oh, I'm feeling anxious, and you use them, and you use this breath for both of them, and then you feel any kind of shift. The more you can recognize a little bit of a shift, the deeper the shift will be. So you just can't throw these on and run off to the next thing.
If your breathing's already out of control and you already feel quite anxious, just using the oils, is that enough to then bring it down a little bit, and then maybe bring it down a little bit, and then you can you can use the breath? Because sometimes when you're in that state of anxiety, you're not actually thinking, like it's just another thing to do, but your brain has literally just shut down or turned down, it's frozen. So if you can't even think about the breath, are you still going to get benefits if you smell it and apply it? Will that at least bring it down, and then you can keep doing it until you feel calmed down enough, and then you could do the breathing with it?
I think the latter. I think that if the breathing, obviously we don't keep telling ourselves all the time to breathe. It's an autonomic function, but it's also something we can have control over. And so the combination of the breath with the application of the oil, and maybe you have to do it several times, but just taking the three long exhalations with the oil, your breath will change. Now, if you're in a state of 0 to 10, a 7 with anxiety, you're right underneath an anxiety attack or maybe close to it, you need to do some other things. And one of the things is that when we are adrenalized, it says move. So if you try to stay still, that's not going to work. So one of the ways to break that anxiety is do some jumping jacks, jump down to the floor, do some push-ups, get up and dance as fast as you can, turn on some wild drums and dance and shake your body as much as possible.
John,
the truth.
Mom's gonna love this right about now when their 5-year-old son's doing laps around the house as they're trying to get them to school right about now. This is gonna be every mom's dream, and now they can blame you. I'm not a parent, so I have a lot of theories about it, and I don't have to deal with it. But those moments you're talking about. But I do believe that a lot of times, if you just get a child to really express themselves, like really shake their body, it'll shake some of that energy out of them. If you try to control it, it's going to make it even worse sometimes. So if you have 1 minute of just shaking wildly, it's a neurological exercise that's very, very powerful. So anyway, so these two oils, the Vagal and the Anxiety Resolve, are really the go-to oils to shift those lower functions. If you got a mind that cannot focus because you're so anxious, then you go to neurospeed. John, we've got a couple of people that are loving this, but they've got to go to get to their kids, and we will do another interview. Is there any way you can give us a 1-minute summary of the highlights for the parents? Yes. On with this interview the whole time, because I can see it on social media, but they're needing to go to get to their children.
Forgive me for my long-windedness. Yes, I would say that the thing to take away is the three layers of the brain are all participating in any kind of anxiety. Anxiety is so wired in, and we're so hardwired to respond to fear that when we're anxious, we're going to be employing all these systems. And so the novelty and the uniqueness of this approach is to work with all the systems. Basically, you're working with the reptilian brain with the vagal oil, you're working with the limbic brain with anxiety resolve, and then for the upper brain, the neocortex, you'd be working with neurospeed and the other oil, which one of my colleagues in my company introduced to you, portal oil. Developing some kind of meditative practice is really critical for really changing the anxiety in a long-term way.
And the good part, John, is we've actually got all of these interviews so people can watch them one after another so they can learn about all these different products and know what's happening. The feedback, though, is they'd love another interview with us going through this protocol again. But I have to say, John, we've captured everyone's attention for a very, 45 minutes. We've done well. So we're going to leave it here today because John, as my mentor, and when he taught me, can be very long-winded, and sometimes I'd like, can we wrap it up now because I'm very So thank you, John, for your time today, and we absolutely would love to interview again if we can get our times right. And we love the PowerPoint slides that will be available for everyone. You can email us and we'll send them to you. And we're happy to talk you through any of these products, but have a listen to all the different interviews that we've got on social media and on YouTube so that you can learn more about why this is so important at this time.
Great. Thanks, Shelley. I really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, John.
Okay.
Let me see.